When I discovered the scale of their deception, I knew immediately that lies wouldn't be my undoing. They would be theirs. My name is Edgar Lawson, and I'm 35 years old. Every morning now, I wake in my own home, make coffee in my kitchen, and breathe freely, knowing the truth finally prevailed. My wife Carla spent months crafting a perfect trap with her lover Brent Harlow while I served overseas, their calculated betrayal designed to strip me of everything: my home, my dignity, my freedom. My jaw clenched when I realized how meticulously they'd staged the scene, rehearsing their parts like actors. Nobody gets to rewrite my story with false accusations and expect to walk away unscathed. Sometimes justice requires standing your ground when everyone else believes you should fall. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from. And make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. The bus from the base pulled into the airport terminal right on schedule. I stepped off with my duffel slung over my shoulder, still in my service uniform. 12 months overseas changes a man, but the thought of coming home kept me grounded through every long night. I'd pictured this moment for weeks, walking through our front door, seeing Carla's face light up, maybe even hearing her laugh that way she did when she was truly happy. My truck sat waiting in long-term parking, a thin layer of dust covering the blue paint. I ran my hand along the hood, leaving 4 clean finger trails. The key turned in the ignition after a moment's hesitation, like the old Chevy was shaking itself awake. "Almost home, girl," I said, patting the dashboard. Just like I promised. The drive through town was surreal. Everything looked the same, but slightly off, like someone had shifted all the furniture in a room by half an inch. The burger place on Main had a new sign. The Wilsons had painted their fence. Small things that reminded me time hadn't stopped while I was gone. I pulled into our driveway at 5:37 p.m. Our little 2-story with the white trim and blue shutters looked exactly as I'd left it. The grass needed cutting, but everything else seemed in order. I took a deep breath before grabbing my duffel. 12 months of missing home, of dreaming about this moment. When I turned my key in the lock and pushed open the front door, I expected Carla's arms, her perfume, maybe even tears. Instead, I found myself staring at 2 uniformed officers standing in my foyer. Their hands rested near their badges, postures rigid and professional. Behind them stood Carla in her silk robe, the blue one I'd given her 2 Christmases ago. Her eyes were red and puffy, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "That's him," she said, her voice small and trembling. "He threatened me from overseas. I have the texts. I'm scared of what he'll do." The confusion hit me first, followed quickly by a cold, sick feeling in my stomach. "Carla, what are you talking about?" I set my duffel down slowly. "I just got home." One officer stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." "There's been some mistake," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I caught movement near my peripheral vision. Brent Harlow, my neighbor from 3 houses down, stood half hidden by the large oak in our front yard, watching. His presence made no sense, but somehow it also made everything suddenly clear. The metal was cold as handcuffs clicked behind my back. My mind raced while they recited my rights, but I didn't struggle. Years of military discipline kept me composed, even as my world collapsed. "Your wife has filed a protective order," the younger officer explained as they guided me to the patrol car. "We're taking you downtown for processing." Through the rear window, I watched my house, my home, shrink from view. My duffel still sat just inside the door, right where I'd dropped it. The processing room downtown smelled like disinfectant and sweat. They took my fingerprints, my belt, my shoelaces. "Standard procedure," they said. I answered their questions mechanically, trying to make sense of what was happening. "When did you last have contact with your wife?" a detective asked, his pen poised above a form. Video call, 3 days ago, I replied. She seemed fine, happy I was coming home. He made a note without looking up. And did you ever threaten Mrs. Lawson during your deployment? Never. The word came out harder than I intended. The holding cell was small and sterile. Concrete bench, stainless steel toilet. I sat there for hours, going over every conversation, every call with Carla during the past year. Nothing made sense. Nothing pointed to this. It wasn't until dawn that an officer came to release me. You're free to go, he said, sliding papers across a desk. But you need to sign this. It was a temporary restraining order. My eyes scanned the pages. Accusations of verbal abuse, threats made during deployment, claims I had a violent temper exacerbated by military service. Carla's signature looked shaky at the bottom. Practiced, almost. I didn't do any of this, I said. Sign it anyway, the officer replied. Court dates in 2 weeks. Sort it out then. Edward was waiting outside in his truck when I emerged. My older brother didn't ask questions until we were halfway to his apartment. You okay? He finally broke the silence. No, I admitted. Not even close. His apartment was small but tidy. He made coffee while I sat at his kitchen table staring at my hands. I don't even know who she is anymore, Ed, I said, after taking the mug he offered. The woman who did this, that's not the Carla I married. Edward nodded, his expression grim. Get some rest. Tomorrow we find you a lawyer. That night, lying on Edward's couch, I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Carla standing there in that silk robe, pointing at me like I was a stranger. A dangerous stranger. If she wants a war, I whispered to the darkness, she just started one. Morning light filtered through Edward's blinds, casting thin stripes across my face. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out of consciousness, replaying yesterday's ambush over and over. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen as I pulled myself upright. You look like hell, Edward said, handing me a steaming mug. Feel like it too. The coffee burned my tongue, but I welcomed the pain. It was real, unlike everything else in my life right now. Edward sat across from me, his expression serious. I called Morty John last night after you crashed. He can see you at 10. Morty John? The name sounded vaguely familiar. Best attorney in the county for this kind of mess. Quiet guy, keeps to himself. But he's ruthless when it counts. Used to handle a lot of military disputes before opening his private practice. I nodded slowly. Sounds about right. And Ed? I added after a pause. Thanks. Don't mention it. He slid a plate of toast across the table. Eat something. You'll need your strength. Morty's office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. No flashy signs, just a simple brass plaque beside the door. The man himself matched his office, understated, precise, with an air of contained capability. Mr. Lawson. He extended his hand across the desk. I understand you've had a difficult homecoming. That was putting it mildly. Morty listened without interruption as I laid out the timeline. My deployment dates, communication logs, Carla's accusations, and the restraining order that now kept me from my own home. When was the last time you were stateside? He asked, making notes on a yellow legal pad. 11 months ago. 2-week leave before final deployment rotation. And during that time, any conflicts with your wife? Arguments that neighbors might have overheard? Anything that could be misconstrued? I shook my head. Nothing. We were good. At least, I paused, remembering the slight distance I'd felt during those 2 weeks, how Carla seemed preoccupied, checking her phone more often. I'd chalked it up to her work stress. At least I thought we were good, I finished. Morty nodded, setting down his pen. Here's how we approach this. We fight facts with facts. No emotion, only precision. Your military records will establish your whereabouts during the alleged threats. We'll subpoena phone records to verify communication. and will request all evidence Carla submitted to obtain the restraining order. His methodical approach should have been comforting, but something still burned in my chest. I want to face her, I said. Not just in court. I want a meeting. Her, me, and our attorneys. Morty raised an eyebrow. That's unusual at this stage. I don't care. I want to look her in the eye when she repeats these lies. He studied me for a moment. Most clients I'd advise against it. But you, he tapped his pen against the pad. You've got the temperament for it. I'll make it a condition of our negotiations. 3 hours later, I walked out with a battle plan. Morty would file motions immediately, beginning with one to preserve any surveillance footage from my home. If there's anything to find, he'd said, we'll find it before it accidentally gets deleted. That evening, back at Edward's apartment, I remembered my backup laptop stored in his garage. While my brother cooked dinner, I dug through his storage boxes until I found it, brushing off a thin layer of dust. "What are you looking for?" Edward called from the kitchen. "Evidence," I replied, powering up the device. Last year, I'd installed a basic security system. Nothing fancy, just cameras covering the front door, garage, and backyard. The footage backed up automatically to the cloud, with a duplicate on this laptop. I'd almost forgotten about it during deployment. I logged in, heart racing as I scrolled through the archived clips. Most were mundane. Mail delivery, neighborhood kids chasing a ball into our yard, Carla coming and going. Then I saw him, Brent Harlow, not just once, but repeatedly. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. The garage door lifted, and Brent slipped inside. He'd used the keypad, which meant Carla had given him the code. I checked another clip. There he was again, 2:17 a.m. on a Friday in April, and another in early May. Always late at night, always entering through the garage like he belonged there. My hands trembled as I downloaded the files to a separate drive. This was it, the first solid piece of proof, not just of an affair, but of their familiarity, their comfort in my home while I was defending our country half a world away. I sat there in darkness, the blue light of the screen flickering across my face as more clips confirmed what I already knew. Betrayal had a name, a face, and now irrefutable timestamps. "You picked the wrong man to frame," I whispered to Carla's image on the screen as she greeted Brent at our front door in another clip. Outside Edward's window, crickets hummed steadily in the summer night, marking the calm before confrontation. 2 days later, I stood on my own front lawn like a visitor. The morning dew had already burned off, leaving behind that sticky late summer heat that clings to your shirt collar. My house, still technically mine according to the deed, looked both familiar and foreign. Morty pulled up in his sensible sedan, straightening his tie as he approached. "Remember what we discussed," he said, voice low. "Let the evidence speak. Don't let them bait you into losing your temper." I nodded. "I spent years defusing actual bombs. I can handle this." He almost smiled at that. Different kind of explosive. We were early, by design. Morty wanted us settled, positioned at the head of the kitchen table when they arrived. The space felt hollow as we entered. Carla had rearranged furniture, removed photos of us together. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the cinnamon air freshener she always used, but something else lingered beneath it. Unfamiliar cologne. The kitchen table, solid oak that we'd picked out together at an estate sale our second year married, now served as the battlefield. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, falling across the worn surface where I'd once shared countless breakfasts with my wife, planning weekends and someday children. Morty arranged his files precisely, then checked his watch. "They're late." "She always is," I replied. "It's a power move." Right on cue, car doors slammed outside. Carla entered first, wearing a cream blouse and navy slacks, her interview outfit. Brent followed close behind in a button-down that strained slightly across his chest. His presence in my home sent a surge of heat up my neck, but I kept my expression neutral, hands flat on the table. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Morty began, professional and measured. Carla's attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Gavin Pierce, nodded curtly. "We're here in good faith, though my client maintains serious concerns about her safety." Carla lowered herself into a chair across from me, eyes never quite meeting mine. Brent stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder. The casual intimacy of it made my jaw tighten. "You scared me, Edgar," Carla said softly, voice rehearsed. "I had no choice." I took a slow breath. "No choice but to claim I threatened you from overseas? On dates I can prove I was on duty?" She blinked rapidly. "You know how you get. Your temper." "Let's stick to verifiable facts," Morty interjected, nodding at me. I reached into a folder and withdrew a printout. Crisp, color, high resolution. I slid it across the table. "This is Brent, in my garage, while I was overseas," I said flatly. 2:13 a.m., March 18th. "There are more, many more." Brent leaned forward, scoffing as he glanced at the image. "That's a misunderstanding. I was helping Carla with maintenance issues. The garage door was sticking." "At 2 in the morning?" I asked. "For multiple nights, across several months?" "Carla was concerned about security while alone," he replied, too quickly. Morty cleared his throat. "Regardless of the reason, entering another man's property without permission constitutes trespassing. The code was not given to Mr. Harlow by my client." Carla's composure slipped. Her eyes narrowed, voice rising. "You're twisting this, Edgar. Making innocent things look dirty because you can't handle that I needed help while you were gone." "The evidence isn't manipulated," Morty responded. "Timestamps don't lie. Neither do the access logs showing the security code being used." "This is ridiculous," Gavin cut in. "My client had every right to invite assistance. We also have Mr. Harlow's vehicle parked overnight on 26 separate occasions," Morty continued, placing another stack of images on the table. "All while my client was deployed. All captured by the street-facing camera Mr. Lawson installed before his deployment." Carla's mask cracked fully then, her carefully constructed narrative faltering against irrefutable evidence. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the tile floor. "You think your little cameras prove anything?" she hissed. "You abandoned me for a year, Edgar. You left me alone." "To serve our country," I replied, voice steady. "Not to give you an excuse to let another man into our bed." The room went silent. Brent shifted uncomfortably. Gavin gathered his papers. "I think we're done here. This meeting was premature." Morty nodded. "Perhaps, but now everyone understands what evidence exists. We'll be filing a motion to dismiss the restraining order tomorrow morning." As they prepared to leave, Carla paused in the doorway, turning back to face me. "You'll regret this," she said, voice low, her confidence unraveling. "You think you know everything?" I said nothing, watching as Brent guided her outside, his hand pressed against the small of her back. Through the window, I observed them climb into Brent's truck together, not even bothering to take separate vehicles anymore. They drove off, dust kicking up from my gravel driveway. "That went as expected," Morty said, collecting his files. "We've shown our first card. Now we wait for their response." I clenched my fists at my sides, watching the truck disappear down the road. "I don't do patience anymore," I replied. That night, back at Edward's apartment, I meticulously uploaded every piece of footage to an encrypted drive. Each file renamed, organized, and backed up. I sent a complete copy to Morty's secure server. This wasn't just evidence anymore. It was ammunition for a war I was no longer afraid to fight. A week stretched out like a desert road. Each morning, I'd wake up on Edward's couch with my mind already racing, ready to add one more brick to the wall of evidence we were building against Carla's lies. "You're turning into a machine," Edward said over breakfast on day 3. He wasn't wrong. The hurt had hardened into something else, something cold and precise. Not a machine, I corrected him. Just focused. Morty arrived at Edward's place around noon that day with a business card pinched between his fingers. "Got someone I want you to meet," he said. The card read, Rocio Medina, private investigator, with a simple embossed magnifying glass logo. No frills, no promises of being the best, just contact information. I liked that. She doesn't advertise much, Morty explained as we drove to her office. Most of her clients come from referrals. She used to work insurance fraud until she got tired of companies protecting their own criminals. Rocio's office was above a laundromat in a part of town that hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade. She greeted us in dark jeans and a leather jacket, her brown hair pulled back tight. "So, this is the guy," she said, appraising me with sharp eyes. "No handshake, no small talk. Morty says your wife set you up with abuse allegations the minute you got home from deployment." "That's the short version," I replied. "The long version is what I need." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Start at the beginning." For 2 hours, I walked her through everything. My deployment schedule, Carla's behavior before I left, the strange timing of her allegations, and the footage of Brent entering our garage. Rocio took notes in a small, leather-bound notebook. "Bank records," she said finally. "That's where people always leave traces. I need access to your accounts." By the third day, Rocio had uncovered what Carla thought she'd buried. A second checking account opened 6 months after I deployed, with regular cash deposits and withdrawals. "Classic affair pattern," Rocio said, spreading the bank statements across her desk. "Here. And here. Hotel charges at the Lakeview Inn twice a month, always on a Tuesday." "She told me she had yoga on Tuesdays," I said, the memory turning bitter in my mouth. I remembered how supportive I'd been when she'd mentioned wanting to try yoga, had even sent her money for the classes from overseas. "Oh, she was getting flexible, all right," Rocio replied, then caught herself when she saw my face. "Sorry." Professional hazard. Dark humor. She visited the Lakeview Inn herself, flashing photos of both Carla and Brent to the front desk clerk. "Confirmed," she told us the next day. "They've been checking in as Mr. and Mrs. Smith since January. Real original." The clerk recognized them immediately, said they always requested room 212. Meanwhile, Morty secured my deployment logs and duty rosters, creating an airtight timeline that proved I couldn't have made the threatening calls Carla alleged. My carrier records showed no calls to our home number during the dates she'd claimed in her statement. "What about the tablet?" Rocio asked on day 5. "You mentioned you shared an iPad. It had been sitting in Edward's storage closet with my other belongings. I hadn't thought to check it. People forget about cloud backups," Rocio explained as she worked. "They delete messages, but don't realize copies still exist." And there it was, in the drafts folder of Carla's email account, still logged in on our shared device. A message to Brent, dated 1 day before my return. "Make sure you're here at 6. He lands at 5. Everything needs to look exactly like we discussed. The smoking gun." The explicit confirmation of premeditation. That evening we gathered in Morty's office, surrounded by stacks of evidence. Bank statements, hotel receipts, deployment logs, phone records, and security footage timestamps. "We file for immediate dismissal of the restraining order tomorrow morning," Morty said, looking over his notes. "With this evidence, we should prevail." Rocio nodded. "The judge can't ignore this. It's too clear-cut." We toasted with paper coffee cups. Morty's office wasn't the kind that kept champagne on hand. "It's not about revenge anymore," I said, surprising myself with the realization. "It's about balance. Setting things right." I slept deeply that night for the first time since coming home. No dreams, no waking in cold sweat. Just darkness and peace. The next morning, I stood before Edward's bathroom mirror at dawn. Sunlight crept through the small window, painting everything in gold. I ran the razor down my cheek, watching the steady movement of my hand. No tremors, no hesitation. Just the precise, methodical strokes of a man who had found his footing again. The courtroom had that familiar smell, wood polish and desperation. I'd spent enough time in military hearings to recognize when justice was being weighed in the balance. Carla sat in the front row beside Brent, their shoulders touching as they whispered back and forth. She wore a pale blue blouse that I recognized, one I'd given her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The sight of it made my stomach twist. "Ready?" Morty asked, arranging documents on our table. "As I'll ever be." Rocio slid into the seat behind us, nodding confidently. She'd spent the night organizing our evidence into what she called an airtight narrative. The judge would see the truth, she promised. All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Winters. Judge Winters was a woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a severe bob. Her eyes scanned the courtroom as she took her seat, lingering briefly on my face before moving to Carla's. "We're here regarding case number 47392, the matter of the restraining order against Edgar Lawson. I understand the respondent has filed for dismissal?" "Yes, Your Honor," Morty said, rising. "We have evidence that conclusively disproves the allegations made against my client." Carla's attorney, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, stood. "Your Honor, my client fears for her safety. Mr. Lawson has displayed aggressive behavior." "We'll hear the evidence," Judge Winters interrupted. "Mr. John, proceed." For the next 40 minutes, Morty methodically presented our case. My deployment records appeared on the courtroom monitor, highlighting the exact dates I'd been overseas. Phone carrier logs showed no calls from my number during the times Carla claimed I'd threatened her. The surveillance footage played, showing Brent entering our garage at 2:13 a.m. on multiple occasions. "And finally, Your Honor," Morty said, "we have this draft email recovered from the couple's shared tablet." He displayed the message on screen. "Make sure you're here at 6. He lands at 5. Everything needs to look exactly like we discussed." I watched Carla's face as the evidence mounted. Her expression remained composed, but her hands, I could see her knuckles whitening as she gripped the bench. When it was her attorney's turn, he attempted to explain away each piece of evidence. The email was taken out of context, he claimed. The surveillance footage merely showed a neighbor helping out while I was away. "And the phone records?" Judge Winters asked. "How do you explain the fact that no calls were made during the alleged threatening incidents?" "My client may have misremembered the exact dates," he replied, his confidence faltering. Judge Winters removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. The courtroom fell silent as she reviewed her notes. "Based on the evidence presented today, I find insufficient grounds to maintain this restraining order. The order is hereby dissolved for lack of credible evidence." The gavel fell with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders dropping as relief flooded through me. Beside me, Morty nodded once, gathering his papers without ceremony. Across the room, Carla's eyes locked with mine. There was no remorse there, no acknowledgement of what she'd done, just cold calculation and something else. Determination, maybe, or threat. She leaned over to whisper something to Brent, who glanced at me with thinly veiled hostility. Outside the courtroom, Rocio shook my hand firmly. "One battle down," she said. "Stay vigilant. This type rarely accepts defeat gracefully." Edward was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. "Well," he asked as I approached, "order's dissolved. I'm officially not a threat to society." He smiled, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "That calls for a celebration. Dinner's on me." That evening, we sat in a corner booth at his favorite steakhouse. For the first time since I'd returned home, I felt something close to normal. Edward raised his glass. "To the truth," he said. "It always finds a way." I tapped my water glass against his beer. "And to good brothers. I'd be lost without you." "That's what family does," he replied simply. Back at Edward's apartment that night, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no jerking awake at midnight wondering where I was. Just peaceful darkness, and the distant sound of traffic lulling me under. Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes across the carpet. I made coffee, savoring the quiet. Everything felt different, cleaner somehow, as if the court's decision had washed away some of the grime of accusation. Edward had already left for the diner. I stood at his kitchen window, watching birds gather at the feeder he kept filled for them. My phone buzzed on the counter. Morty's name flashed on the screen. I answered, still smiling from the previous day's victory. "Edgar." His voice was tight, urgent. "Carla filed a new emergency motion this morning. She's claiming you attacked her during the sit-down at your house." "What? That's insane. You were there?" "She's submitted photographs, bruises on her arms and ribs. Claims you grabbed her when Brent and I stepped outside to discuss the security footage." My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering on the linoleum. "That never happened. You know that." "I know. But the judge has ordered you to appear for questioning." "It doesn't look good, Edgar." The doorbell rang, its cheerful tone a mockery of the dread settling into my bones. Through the peephole, I saw a sheriff's deputy standing on the landing, hand resting casually on his belt. My phone buzzed again with Morty's voice in my ear, but all I could focus on was the uniformed figure waiting to upend my life a second time. I opened the door, keeping my face neutral despite the familiar heaviness settling in my chest. The deputy's expression was professionally blank, a look I'd worn myself in uncomfortable situations. "Edgar Lawson, I have a warrant to bring you in for questioning." I nodded once. "Let me grab my phone to call my attorney." The ride to the station felt longer than my 12-month deployment. The deputy didn't speak much beyond procedural information, and I matched his silence. No point giving them anything they could twist later. At the station, they led me to an interview room. Not a cell this time, but the message was clear. I sat with my hands folded on the metal table, the fluorescent lights humming overhead like they were counting down to something. "We need to photograph your hands," an officer said, setting up a small camera. I extended both hands, palms up, then down. Knuckles, fingertips, wrists, all documented with clinical precision. I understood what they were looking for. Bruising, cuts, any signs that I'd struck someone. There wouldn't be any. "Your attorney's here," the officer finally said, after what felt like hours. Morty walked in with his usual composed demeanor, briefcase in hand. After a brief consultation, he demanded to see the photographs Carla had submitted. The detective slid a folder across the table. "These alleged injuries supposedly happened during a meeting where I was present the entire time," Morty stated firmly. "My client never touched Mrs. Lawson." The questioning continued for another 2 hours. I kept my answers concise, factual, and emotionless. Exactly what Morty had coached me to do. By late afternoon, he'd secured my release with no charges filed, yet. "They're building a case," Morty warned as we walked to his car. "Judge Winters issued another temporary restraining order until this new allegation is resolved." "So we're back to square one?" I asked, exhaustion seeping into my bones. "Not quite. We have credibility from the first hearing. We just need to dismantle this new claim." Edward was waiting outside his diner when we pulled up. He'd closed early to pick me up. The gesture hit me hard. Small kindnesses always do when you're at your lowest. "Back to my place," he said simply. Not a question. That evening, we sat at his kitchen table with containers of Chinese food. Neither of us was really eating. The chopsticks felt clumsy in my fingers, my appetite gone. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. Edward knew when words weren't needed. 12 months in a war zone," I finally said, putting down the container, "and nothing hit me as hard as this." Edward nodded. "Because over there, you knew who the enemy was." My phone vibrated. Rozio calling. I put her on speaker. "I'm analyzing the photographs now," she said without preamble. "Something's off about them. The bruise patterns don't match what you'd typically see with an assault. They look deliberate." "Deliberate how?" I asked. "Like someone pressed against a hard edge. A door frame, maybe. I've seen similar patterns in other cases. Self-inflicted or staged." Hope flickered. A tiny, dangerous feeling I almost wanted to suppress. "There's more," Rozio continued. "The metadata on the photos shows they were taken yesterday morning. But her affidavit claims the bruising appeared immediately after your meeting 3 days ago." "So she's lying about when they appeared," Edward interjected. "Exactly. Real bruises change color as they heal. These don't show the progression you'd expect if they were 3 days old." After we hung up, I paced the length of Edward's living room. The walls felt like they were closing in, not from panic, but from a need to act, to move forward, to end this. "They think they broke me," I said, more to myself than to Edward. The next morning, Morty arrived with coffee and a determined expression. Rozio joined us an hour later, laying out her findings with methodical precision. "The bruises were almost certainly created by pressing against a hard edge," she confirmed. "And look at this. The angle is consistent with self-application. If someone had grabbed her, the pattern would be different." Morty nodded, already making notes. "We'll request an independent medical examination, and we need to formally challenge the timestamp discrepancy." Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. I watched the droplets race down the glass, each one following its inevitable path downward. My phone buzzed with a text from Rozio. "Found something else. We have her cold." That night, I stood at Edward's window watching lightning split the sky. Each flash illuminated the neighborhood for a heartbeat, before darkness reclaimed it. I felt strangely calm, not the false calm of shock, but the steady resolve that comes when you know exactly what needs to be done. The storm outside matched the one building within me, but unlike the chaos of thunder and lightning, my response would be calculated, precise, and devastating. A week passed like a funeral procession. Every day, I woke up on Edward's couch with the same hollow feeling in my chest. But this morning was different. Today was mediation day. I straightened my tie in Edward's bathroom mirror. Not my service uniform, Morty advised against it, but a simple charcoal suit that felt like armor in its own way. "You ready?" Edward called from the kitchen. "As I'll ever be," I replied. The county courthouse annex had those fluorescent lights that make everyone look sick. Morty met us in the lobby, briefcase in hand, Rozio beside him with her tablet and files. "Remember," Morty said quietly, "let the evidence speak. No outbursts, no accusations, just facts." I nodded. I didn't come this far to lose my cool at the finish line. The mediation room felt smaller than it probably was. A long table with water pitchers and those little notepads nobody ever uses. Carla and Brent arrived 5 minutes late. A power move that didn't work because we were already seated at the stronger position of the table. Carla wore a cream blouse that made her look pale, fragile. Brent had on what I recognized as his serious business blazer from his dealership commercials. Their lawyer, a thin man with perpetually raised eyebrows, nodded curtly. The mediator, a retired judge named Holbrook, explained the process in a monotone that suggested he'd given this speech 1,000 times. "This is not a trial," he reminded everyone. "It's a chance to resolve matters without further litigation." When he finished, he turned to me. "Mr. Lawson, since you requested this mediation, would you like to begin?" I looked at Carla directly for the first time in weeks. Those green eyes that once held my whole world now just looked calculating, searching for weaknesses. "I'd like to present evidence," I said simply. Morty nodded, and I laid out our case methodically, like field stripping a weapon. First, The Ring camera footage showing Brent entering our house at 2:13 a.m. on multiple nights while I was deployed. This doesn't prove anything inappropriate, Carla's lawyer interrupted. It proves unauthorized access, Morty countered, and establishes a pattern. Next came the phone records showing I never called from overseas during the times Carla claimed I'd threatened her. Maybe you used someone else's phone, Brent muttered. Rocio slid forward the deployment logs and base access records. Every call from the base is logged. There were none. Then came Rocio's analysis of the bruise photographs, complete with time-stamp discrepancies and forensic evaluation showing inconsistencies with assault patterns. These bruises are consistent with deliberate pressure against a hard edge, Rocio explained, her voice clinical. And they were photographed a day before they were claimed to have appeared. Carla shifted in her seat, her fingers curling around the edge of the table. This doesn't mean anything, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I placed the final piece of evidence on the table, the printout of the unsent text message. Make sure you're here at 6. He lands at 5. The mediator leaned forward slightly, eyes sharper now. Rocio tapped her tablet screen. There's one more thing you should hear. She pressed play on an audio file labeled Plan that we'd recovered from Carla's cloud backup. The room filled with Carla's voice, clear and deliberate. He'll be jet-lagged. Cry. Say, he scared me. Have the photos ready. If they ask questions, just keep saying you're afraid. It's not complicated. I watched Brent's face drain of color. His eyes darted between Carla and his lawyer, then back to the tablet as if it were a venomous snake. She told me to, he blurted suddenly. She said it was the only way. Carla's head snapped toward him. Brent! She planned everything, he continued, words tumbling out now. The bruises, the timing. She said we'd get the house and… He stopped, finally seeing the trap he'd walked into. Morty leaned forward, his voice perfectly level. Mr. Harlow, are you stating for the record that you and Mrs. Lawson deliberately fabricated evidence of abuse? Brent's lawyer tried to intervene, but Brent was already nodding. I helped her stage the photos. I didn't think it would go this far. Morty's expression didn't change. You've both committed perjury and filed false reports. Here's what happens now. You withdraw all claims, Mrs. Lawson surrenders the house and pays damages as outlined in the prenuptial agreement, or we proceed with criminal charges. Carla seemed to collapse inward, her careful facade crumbling. Please, Edgar, she whispered. We can work this out. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but a dull, distant ache where love used to be. You already wrote the ending, I said quietly. Brent signed his statement first, hand trembling slightly as the pen scratched across paper. Carla sat motionless, staring blankly at the wall as if watching the empire of lies she'd built collapse into dust. 2 months crawled by like molasses on a winter morning. Court dates, paperwork, hearings, each one a small battle in the larger war for my life back. I'd wake up each morning in Edward's spare room, staring at the ceiling and mentally preparing for another day of watching my marriage dissected in sterile legal language. Rocio became our quiet hero. She stood before the judge, composed and clinical, explaining how she'd uncovered the timestamps on Carla's bruise photos. The metadata shows these images were taken 26 hours before the alleged incident, she testified, pointing to the enlarged photographs. Furthermore, the bruise patterns are inconsistent with the type of assault described in Mrs. Lawson's affidavit. I sat in the back row, arms folded across my chest, watching the judge's expression shift from professional neutrality to something harder. When Rocio played the recovered audio file, Carla's voice outlining their plan, I felt nothing but a hollow vindication. The truth doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it just feels necessary. Morty was relentless, but never theatrical. He submitted motion after motion, each one another brick in the wall of consequence around Carla and Brent. The prenuptial agreement became a guillotine. Clause 14 specifically addressed infidelity and fraudulent legal claims. My client seeks enforcement of the agreement as written, Morty told the court. The evidence clearly establishes both conditions have been met. By week 6, the district attorney filed charges, misdemeanor conspiracy, and false reporting against both Carla and Brent. Carla's lawyer negotiated a no-contest plea, which the court accepted with visible reluctance. She was ordered to pay full restitution, court costs, and my complete legal fees. The financial blow was devastating for her, over $43,000 all told. Brent's cooperation earned him reduced charges, but cost him everything else. The state regulatory board cited his involvement in the conspiracy and revoked his motor vehicle sales license. His business collapsed within weeks. I heard from Edward that Brent was now working odd jobs 2 towns over, living in a studio apartment above a laundromat. The whispers followed him everywhere. The man who helped frame a veteran just returned from deployment. Remember those backyard barbecues where everyone knew everyone? The smell of charcoal and the sound of ice clinking in glasses as neighbors wandered between yards? Brent would never experience that again. Some bells can't be unrung. With the legal battles winding down, Edward helped me reclaim my house. We spent a weekend repainting the porch, a deep blue-gray that reminded me of twilight over the base. We replaced every lock, front door, back door, garage, even the windows. It wasn't about security. It was about erasing fingerprints that weren't mine. "You holding up okay?" Edward asked as we installed the new deadbolt. "Getting there," I replied. The house still felt like a crime scene some days, but less so with each change. I found Carla's wedding photo in the hallway closet one afternoon. Funny how someone can look both familiar and completely foreign at the same time. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a puzzled distance, like trying to remember a dream that doesn't make sense in daylight. I placed the frame in a donation box alongside other memories that no longer belonged to me. On a Thursday evening in early autumn, Morty's sedan pulled into my driveway. He carried a leather portfolio containing the final documents, court orders, settlement agreements, and release forms. We sat at my kitchen table as he explained each page. "It's done," he said simply, closing the portfolio. "Legally speaking, this chapter is complete." I poured us each a finger of whiskey. We didn't toast. We just drank in the quiet recognition of closure. After Morty left, I stepped out onto my newly painted porch. The evening air carried the first hint of fall, crisp and clean and somehow hopeful. Across the street, a moving truck was parked in front of Carla's rental. Workers carried out the last of her furniture as she supervised, pointedly not looking in my direction. I watched silently as they loaded her final possessions. When the truck finally pulled away, I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that things had landed where they belonged. Justice doesn't shout. It just stays. 6 months had passed since that moving truck pulled away. Winter had come and gone, and spring was turning everything green again. My life had found its rhythm. Not the same as before, but steady in its own way. I ran every morning at dawn when the streets were empty and the air still felt clean. 5 miles out and back, no matter the weather. Something about the consistent impact of feet on pavement helped reset my mind. The neighborhood had stopped whispering when I passed by. Old stories make poor gossip after a while. Edward's Diner became my second home. I'd sit in the corner booth most mornings, nursing black coffee while he worked the grill. Sometimes we'd talk, sometimes not. That's the thing about brothers. Silence doesn't need filling. "You look better," Edward said one Tuesday, sliding a plate of eggs in front of me. "Less haunted around the eyes." I nodded. Getting there. Word traveled in small circles. Carla was waiting tables at a highway restaurant 30 miles north, using her maiden name. Nobody recognized her there. She'd cut her hair short and dyed it blonde, according to Alice, who worked at the pharmacy and had a cousin who stopped there for lunch. I didn't care enough to confirm the details. The local paper ran Brent Harlow's bankruptcy notice in the legal section. It felt small, seeing someone's financial death announced in 10-point type between foreclosures and name changes. He was working construction jobs across the county line, living in a basement apartment with concrete walls. The man who once boasted about his business connections now carried drywall for hourly pay. Remember when I was a kid and saw a water strider skimming across the surface of a lake? It looked like magic, how it could move on top of something that should have swallowed it. That's what getting your life back feels like. Walking on water, grateful for surface tension. My phone rang one Wednesday afternoon. Rocio Medina's name flashed on the screen. "Edgar? Just wanted you to know the final restitution payment cleared yesterday." Her voice had that satisfied edge investigators get when a case truly closes. Every penny accounted for. "Thanks for everything, Rocio. Most people would have broken under what they did to you," she said. "You built something instead." After we hung up, I went to the garage and pulled out the old welcome mat that had been sitting by the trash for months. The one Carla had picked out years ago. "Welcome home" in faded letters. I carried it to the backyard fire pit and set it down. That evening, I lit a small fire. The flames licked at the synthetic fibers, turning them black before consuming them entirely. I didn't speak any words over it or make any ceremonies. Some endings don't need announcement. They just need to happen. Night fell as the last embers died down. I stood on my porch, looking out at the quiet street. It's strange how quickly loyalty becomes leverage, how trust becomes a trap. All those years serving overseas, I'd worried about external threats, never the one waiting at my kitchen table, rehearsing lines for my destruction. You know what's funny? I never wanted revenge, not really. What I wanted was reclamation. I wanted my name back, my house back, my dignity back. I wanted the truth to matter more than a well-timed tear. If someone ever uses lies to take your life from you, don't scream. Don't break. Build your case, stand tall, and let the truth ruin them. Not because you want to see them suffer, but because you refuse to carry what belongs to them. I ran my hand along the porch railing, freshly painted last week. The wind rustled through new leaves on the maple tree I'd planted in the front yard. Inside, a single lamp glowed through the window. My house again? My life again? I turned off the porch light and walked inside, finally at peace. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.